Good morning. Think we're up and running? I don't know. I believe that we are. Good morning. Yes, I think we're up and running now. It's good to have you joining us this morning if you are able to make it with us and be here with us live. If you're watching this later on, we thank you for that as well. I think we've kind of figured out this how to work all this, how to operate it, so that's good. I hope the video and audio are working well, and we are going to be here with you looking at some things for the next few minutes. Good morning, thank you. I see some comments. It's always good to see that, so that's kind of so I know that things are working the way that they're supposed to, so thank you for that. Just want to remind everybody to continue to be in prayer for the current situation of our world and with the coronavirus and those that are affected by that. Also, the workers that are still going to work through this all, some of them being on the front lines of this, and other ones just being essential, and we are thankful for them and the work that they're doing, and we ask that you would continue to pray with them and that you would lift them up in your prayers. It's good to be joined with you this morning, and we're just going to spend a few moments looking at a event in the life of Jesus here. And I just realized something here, but that's all right. We'll figure it out. We're good. All righty. So we are going to be this morning looking at the account of Jesus, going to focus specifically on an event that happens in the life of Jesus and his disciples that we see. So we are going to spend some time this morning looking at Matthew 14. And in Matthew 14, let me see here. The disciples, they find themselves in a boat. They've been in a boat before. That's not really anything that's kind of unusual to them. This isn't the first time we've read about them being on a boat. We know that Peter and Andrew and James and John were fishermen. James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, they were in a boat with their father repairing nets when Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. Jesus used a boat regularly to cross the Sea of Galilee. He even preaches from a boat at one point to a large crowd. Travel by boat was common, and so it's something we see throughout the Gospels. They are in a boat and they are traveling, but the boat ride in Matthew 14 is a little different. It's not the routine ride from one side of the lake to the other. It started out that way. Jesus and the disciples just fed a crowd of 5,000 people, and it was getting late in the day, and the crowd is full and all fed from just those few loaves and fishes, and they're sent home. And Jesus tells the disciples to go ahead of him in a boat to the other side of the lake, and he's going to meet up with them later. Then Jesus goes up on a mountain by himself to pray, alone, spending time with God the Father. As the disciples sail, night falls and the once gentle seas are no more. A storm has rolled in, and their boat is being battered by the wind and waves, and they are scared because storms are scary. Just this past week, we had that storm roll through the Ohio Valley, and it was a scary storm. There was golf ball-sized hail falling in some parts around here. There was a tornado watch. The National Weather Service out of Pittsburgh said there was some rain-wrapped tornadoes possibly touched down near Mingo. It was a scary time. You might have got that warning on your phone like I did and went to the basement just to take cover or shelter somewhere because storms are scary. And even though I've never been on a boat in a storm, I would imagine that is even more scary than being on land during a storm because there's that other factor in there that you're on the water. You're in the boat. Now, We're not exactly told this in the text in Matthew 14, but I think it's probably fair to say that some of the people on that boat, some of those disciples maybe thought they were going to die. They thought it was the end. They are in a storm, on a boat, far from shore. Then early in the morning, they see the unbelievable. They see something that is irrational. They see something that they can't explain. They see something impossible. Someone or something is walking towards them on the water. And terrified, they scream out. One of them yells, "It's a ghost!" As they watch this figure approach the boat, and seeing this figure walk on water, it seems to have terrified them more than the storm does. They've seen storms before, and while storms are scary, they can be explained. Storms are nothing new. They're just something that naturally happen. They're nothing out of the ordinary. But seeing something or someone walking on the water, they've never seen that before. Walking on the water in the midst of a storm. They've never seen that before, and they cannot believe their eyes. They think it's a ghost or some sort of disembodied spirit. They're not exactly sure what it is that they're looking at. And why do they think that? Now, some people might use this passage to come to some kind of conclusion that this is evidence that, ghosts are real or that kind of thing. And I don't, are the disciples here giving proof that ghosts roam the earth? To make that kind of conclusion from this passage, I think it would be a mistake. I think the disciples aren't making a statement on whether or not ghosts are real or anything like that. What I think they're trying to do is they are trying to explain the unexplainable. They are seeing something that they have never seen before, someone or they think something walking on the water, so they explain it with something that they've probably never seen before, a ghost. They're looking at this kind of rationally. They know that people do not and cannot walk on water, yet they are seeing it. Something that their experience and reason tells them is impossible. People do not and cannot walk on water, so it must be something else, so they cry out in terror, "It's a ghost." But they're wrong, because Jesus calls out to those on a boat in a storm, far from the shore. "Be encouraged," he proclaims. "It's me. Don't be afraid." It's not a ghost that is walking on the water, and even though people do not and cannot walk on water, even though that just doesn't happen, it's happening now. The one who is fully human and fully divine walks on the water and walks on the water in a storm. Yet one of the disciples, a man named Peter, seems to still doubt his eyes and even his ears, for it would appear to him that seeing and hearing is really not believing. He sees something walking on the water. He hears Jesus' voice call out, so he sees Jesus. He hears that voice, but then Peter calls out, "Lord, if it's really you, order me to come out to you on the water." It's a strange request, I think. He sees Jesus walking on the water in a storm. He hears him call out, but he's in a state of disbelief. Not that he can be blamed. I mean, would any of us believe our eyes and our ears if we were hearing and seeing this? Peter is looking at the impossible with his own eyes. He's there experiencing what we've read about dozens of times, maybe more. He's there experiencing it live, and maybe he wants to make sure that he's not just seeing something. Maybe he wants to make sure that he's not just hearing something. Maybe he wants to make sure that he's not just in a dream, so he calls out to Jesus, "If it's really you, order me to come out to you on the water." And when Peter calls out, Jesus responds with one simple, beautiful word: "Come." This isn't the first time that Peter has heard that call from Jesus either. In Matthew 4, verses 18 through 20, we read, "As Jesus walked along the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, one who was called Peter, and Andrew, throwing fishing nets into the sea because they were fishermen. 'Come, follow me,' Jesus said, and I'll make you fishers of men. Right away they left their nets and followed him. Jesus calls for people to come to him. These verses may be familiar. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus later tells the little children, come to me. Let them come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom belongs to such as these. Come to me. That call of Jesus rang out to Peter, and it still rings out for us today. Jesus also later declares in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Whoever comes to me. If we are hungering and thirsting today, Jesus can fill those spiritual hungers and thirsts that we have. And Jesus is calling you today to come to him. Come and follow me. That is still his calling today for you. Preparing for the study, though, something stood out to me in this story for perhaps the first time. And in this story, we so often get focused on Jesus and what Jesus does. And I mean, he's walking on water, so it's pretty amazing. So to just think that Jesus is out there and he's walking on water, and that's often the focus of our story, and it probably should be. But something really stood out to me this time that I'm not sure if it ever really has before. In Matthew 14, verse 27, Jesus says, be encouraged. It's me. Don't be afraid. When the disciples become, are scared and yell out, it's a ghost, Jesus says, no, it's me. Don't be afraid. But before we get to Peter's response, we see those words again for the third study in a row. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Then Peter, after Jesus says that, Peter replied, Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you on the water. I find this a very strange request, and it stood out to me in a way that I don't know if it ever has before. I would think that if I was Peter and I'm on this boat in a storm, we're far away from the shore, I think that I would be saying to Jesus, get in this boat. Come on, get in here as quick as you can, and let's calm the storm. But Peter has other thoughts on his mind, I guess. Peter doesn't want to wait for Jesus to get in the boat, but Peter wants to get to Jesus. He's willing to get out of that boat in that storm to go to Jesus. There's really no doubt with Peter. If you look at kind of the original language here that this was written in, Peter doesn't say, if it's really you, Jesus, and you say you want me to come, I guess I will. He doesn't say, I suppose that's something I could do. He doesn't say, I'll do that if I have to. There's really none of that. He looks at Jesus and if you tell me to come, I will. You just say the words and I'll get out of this boat. If you just give me that order, I will follow. There's really no doubt or hesitation kind of in that language. It's not, I'm going to do it if I have to or because I should. Or no, you tell me to do it, and I will. Now, why does Peter want to go to Jesus so bad? Why is Peter willing to get out of a boat in a storm to go to Jesus? Is it that Peter has that much love for Jesus? Does Peter have that much desire to be with him? Is Peter that loyal to Jesus? Well, if you know what Peter does later on in denying Jesus 3 times, maybe it's not those things that made him want to go to Jesus, or maybe that was in that moment that he was feeling. I don't know, but if you just turn back a little bit in Matthew, we go to Matthew chapter 8, and in verses 23 through 27, here's what we read. But Jesus got into a boat. His disciples followed him. A huge storm arose on the lake, so the waves were sloshing over the boat, but Jesus was asleep. They came and woke him, saying, Lord, rescue us. We're going to drown. He said to them, Why are you afraid, you people of weak faith? Then he got up and gave orders to the wind and the lake, and there was a great calm. The people were amazed and said, "What kind of person is this? Even the winds and the waves, the water, the lake obey him." Why does Peter want to get to Jesus so badly? I think it may be because Peter had already been with Jesus before in a storm on a boat far from shore. And while they were sailing, a great storm came in, and the wind and the waves batter the boat. The disciples are scared. They think they're going to die from the storm. They think they're going to drown, so they go get Jesus, but Jesus is sleeping. The storm rages on. The disciples panic. Jesus sleeps. The disciples are worried. They think they're going to die. They're scared for their lives, but yet Jesus sleeps. Is there any greater sign of someone who is worry-free than sleep? Right? So worry can keep us up at night staring at our ceiling for hours. It's hard to sleep when we're worried. We got those things on our mind and they just keep running through, and we just keep thinking of all the different possibilities and what could happen and what might happen. And we play through all these different scenarios in our mind because we're so worried. Or we're worried that maybe we're in a dangerous situation or that something's going to happen. If you were worried, I think it would be hard to sleep, especially if you're worried in the midst of a storm. I've been caught up in a couple of storms before. I remember one time as a teenager, my family went to visit Washington, D.C. We went down there to see some of the monuments and experience all that, but a storm passed through and we were in our hotel and we had to get down. There's a tornado that passed through, and we had to get down in the kind of the shelter areas of the hotel, and we were scared and we were worried, and I don't think I could have slept in that situation. I don't think that's something that I could have done, but yet here on a boat in a storm, Jesus sleeps. Seems to have no worries. Jesus has no trouble sleeping through the storm, through the winds, through the waves, and Jesus isn't worried because he is the master of the wind. He is the master of the waves. Now, I don't know exactly what was going through Peter's mind when he called out to Jesus, "Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you on the water." But I wonder if he was thinking that he's been with Jesus one other time through a storm on a boat far from shore, and that Jesus calmed that storm. He's already been with Jesus through the storm once before, and I wonder if he wants to get to Jesus because he thinks that if he's with Jesus, he can make it through this storm as well. So Jesus replies to Peter's call, "Come." So Peter steps out of the boat and he does the impossible. He does what can't be done. He does what doesn't make sense to do, and he walks on the water towards Jesus. And not only is he walking on the water, but he's walking on stormy water. But then in verse 30, we're told something very interesting. We are told that when Peter saw the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. And this is interesting because we are told that Peter saw the strong wind, but can you really see wind? We can see the effects of wind. We can see wind blowing the leaves on a tree, or we can see wind blowing up some dust or some sand or whatever it may be. But we really don't see the wind, but we see the effects of the wind. We see the influence of the wind. So when Peter's walking on the water and he sees the strong wind, that means that he sees the waves. He sees the storm. Now, typically when someone is walking towards something, they're looking at what they're walking towards, right? If you're walking towards something, if you want to walk towards the door of your house or towards another person, you're probably going to be looking at them so that you can keep your eyes on where you're going, so that you can know where you're walking and make sure that nothing's in your path and you can stay focused on what lies ahead. So I think it's a fair assumption to say that Peter, when he gets out of the boat, when he's walking on the water, he is looking at Jesus, actually physically looking at Jesus. But then he gets distracted. He sees the wind. He sees the waves. He sees the storm. When the winds and waves and storms of life come, what is your focus on? Peter walks on water when he focuses on Jesus, when he is looking at Jesus, but something takes his focus away and he starts to sink. So what is it for you that takes your attention, that takes your focus away from Jesus? Is it worry or fear or maybe money or possessions or maybe relationships with other people? Now, relationships, friendships, fellowships with others, that's not a bad thing, but those things can distract us from Jesus. Maybe it's work. For some of you, maybe that's not a problem right now, and work's not very distracting. For others of you, it may be very distracting right now as you are working more and harder than you've ever had to work before because of the current situation. Maybe it's technology. Maybe you're playing some video games or watching some TV shows or watching movies or just binging Netflix during this quarantine and can be distracted. Maybe it's even just getting lost in some books or whatever the case may be. What is it that distracts you from Jesus, that takes your eyes away from Jesus? What is it? And how can we overcome those distractions, I think, is what really our focus should be maybe. How can we stay focused on Jesus? And the answer to that question is simple, yet can be very difficult to accomplish. And how do we keep our eyes on Jesus? Primarily, I would say we keep our eyes on Jesus through what those of us in the Wesleyan theological tradition would call spiritual disciplines. You know what they are, things like praying and reading the Bible and doing your devotions, but there are also spiritual disciplines such as fasting or journaling or silence or solitude or rest or confession. There are a lot of different things that are spiritual disciplines that we can practice so that we can be formed into the image of Jesus Christ. What they are, why we do them, how to practice them, I think that might be a really worthwhile study. So that's what we're going to do next week. Next week on Tuesday and Thursday, we'll be right here again, 10:30 on the Finley Facebook page, and we'll be talking those 2 days about spiritual disciplines, and we'll be looking at what they are, why we practice them, and also how to practice them so we can be practical in our faith as well. So we'll look at those in depth more next week, next Tuesday, next Thursday. But it is through those spiritual disciplines and regularly practicing those things that Christians have been practicing since the church has started. And that is the way that we keep our eyes and focus on Jesus. But Peter, like many of us, he took his eyes off Jesus. And then when he sees the storm around him, he becomes frightened, and Peter's walking on the water in that storm far from shore and becomes scared. Even though Jesus had told him and the rest of the disciples, what did he just tell them? It's me. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. In the storms of life, the words of Jesus still ring out to us today. Do not be afraid. Yet Peter, when he sees the storm, when he sees the wind, when he sees the waves, he becomes scared. The times we are living in now are scary. This is a worldwide pandemic with the coronavirus, and people are getting sick with this virus. And unfortunately, people are dying because of this, and it is heartbreaking, and it is terrifying to think what is happening to some people out there, and maybe that could happen to me or some of my loved ones or people that I know. It's scary. But the words of Jesus remain. Do not be afraid. Be cautious and stay healthy. Please practice staying safe and social distancing. I'm all for that and advocating that you would stay healthy, but be not afraid. We talked about why we don't have to fear in the last two studies that we've done, so I'm not going to get into that a whole lot. You can go back and watch them. They're still up on our page, and we really kind of looked at some passages from Isaiah and other passages with Jesus and Matthew that why don't we need to be afraid and just how valuable we are to God. So I'm not going to get into that a whole whole lot. You can go back and watch those other studies, but Peter begins to sink and calls out, "Lord, rescue me." And if you are sinking today, call out to Jesus, "Lord, rescue me." Maybe you're sinking in sin or burdens or stress or just life. Call out to Jesus. Now, the scriptures don't tell us this either, but I would think that when Peter began to sink, he felt rather helpless. When Peter started to go down in the water, he thought there was nothing that he could do to save himself. Now, it's fair to assume, since Peter was a fisherman, that he probably knew how to swim. He probably knew how to do that. And maybe if this was a calm sea in the middle of the day and Peter started to sink, maybe he wouldn't have been so scared. Maybe he wouldn't have been so nervous. Maybe he just would have said, "Well, I gave it a try and then I started to sink, but now I'm just going to swim back to the boat and my friends are going to help pull me aboard." Maybe that would have happened if it was a calm sea in the middle of the day, but the storms of life have a way of reminding us that we are helpless. They make us aware that we need help and that we can't do everything on our own and that we can't rely just on ourselves, but we have to rely on Jesus and also on the people of God to help us with our spiritual growth as well. We have to rely on other people, that we can't do this all by ourselves. "Lord, rescue me," Peter cries out, and immediately Jesus reaches out and grabbed him. Then Jesus asks Peter a question. "You of little faith, why did you begin to doubt?" That's got to be a really hard question for anyone to ask you in this kind of situation. Why did you begin to doubt? But especially for Jesus to ask you that. And Peter doesn't answer, at least we're not told his answer in this passage, but I think we can see that. Why did Peter begin to doubt? Because he got distracted and he took his eyes off Jesus. When Peter was focused on Jesus, he had enough faith to walk on water, but when distracted, he began to sink. But even though Peter began to doubt, Jesus still rescued him, and Jesus is there to rescue you today too. And when Jesus gets in the boat, the wind settles down, and those in the boat worship Jesus, saying, "Surely you must be the Son of God." Now today you may feel like you're in a storm on a boat far from shore, but Jesus is calling out to you, "Don't be afraid. Fear not," he is calling out, "for I am the master of the winds and the waves. I am the one who can calm the storm and the one who, even if the storm doesn't calm, will be with you through it all." See, I can't promise you that the storms of life will calm down, and I don't think Jesus makes that promise either. He tells us we'll have trouble in this world, but we should be encouraged, or that we should take heart because he has overcome this world and the trouble. So the troubles of this world don't have to define you and who you are. The troubles of this world don't have to tear you down. The troubles of this world don't have to lead to doubt, because Jesus is with us in the midst of the storm. Jesus is with us when we cross the waters, and Jesus is with us in the fire. Because when we step out of the boat of comfort or safety that we're sailing in, and we step out into the deep waters, into the unknown, when Jesus is calling us to go there, when we step out, it may seem like we should sink or that we shouldn't make it. It may seem impossible, but God is the God who turns the impossible into the possible. The irrational to rational. And he's the God who doesn't abandon us to walk those waters alone. And with a God like that, there is no need to doubt. There's no need to have just a little bit of faith, but there is reason to believe. There is reason to trust. And there is reason to know that when you are in a storm on a boat far from shore, Jesus is with you, and he is the master of the wind. Jesus is with us through it all, and for that we are thankful. So today, I ask, are you keeping your eyes on Jesus? Are you staying focused? I encourage you to spend some time examining your life, asking yourself those questions, and then I encourage you to join us next Tuesday and Thursday right here at 10:30 a.m. on the Finley Facebook page. We'll be live again, and we'll be studying spiritual disciplines and what they are and the scriptural basis for them and why we practice spiritual disciplines and how we can practice them so that we can stay focused on Jesus and not get distracted. So I hope you're able to join us next week. I thank you for joining us with us now. And I encourage you to remember that Jesus is with you through the storms of life. He will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. But He is there, and we are thankful. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope everyone stays safe and stays healthy. Thank you so much, and have a great day.